Hello, everyone. Thanks again for inviting me back. Paul suggested this to him. I thought would make a fairly short presentation. I think I've made it a little bit longer, but hopefully it'll be short and crisp to the point. So this is a product called the Pocket Powerbox, and I'll tell you a little bit about what is it. Probably some of you are going, what is a Powerbox and why does it have anything to do with astronomy? Talk a little bit about some of the options that are out there. I'll talk a bit about my setup in this particular case and how it's being used. I'll show you how the cool software that comes with the Powerbox works, and talk a little bit about the conclusions, and then show you the latest and greatest and even better version, what it might do for you. So when I was thinking about how do I introduce this thing, I was thinking, okay, well, why do these things exist? And I think the big reason they exist is that there's a difference now between sort of what we call visual, what we think of as visual astronomy power requirements versus imaging astronomy power requirements. So when you think about what you might be doing with a typical telescope doing visual observing, you really need some sort of 12-volt power supply that you can take out with you in the field. You can plug it in. You're pretty well driving the telescope. Maybe you're driving a hand paddle to go with it. And you might have an optional laptop or tablet or something to help you do some star finding or whatever, but you really don't need a lot. So you really kind of need one power thing, whether it's an old style lead acid, as this Celestron power tank is, or a new style lithium, more expensive but more sexy battery that you can buy now. So that's essentially kind of what you would use if all your requirements are fairly simple. However, if you look at what you need to do if you're out in the field and you want to do some imaging, well, you need a camera. Obviously, you need a focuser for the camera. You need to drive the telescope. You're probably going to need an imaging computer or laptop to go with it. You might like to have a GPS just in case you go somewhere interesting, and et cetera, et cetera. And so one of the things that comes with this is you're going to end up with a lot of wires. And you're going to end up with a lot of wires that are potentially falling around, and then there's a lot of connections to be made. And this is where the Powerbox comes in. So what is it? It's a central unit that acts as a power distribution center, and it has a lot of built-in electronics and so forth, and in particular it's fused to protect your gears. So the particular one I have here, it's got reverse polarity protection on everything, so that if I was to do my own cable and wire it the wrong way, if I plug it in, instead of getting a poof, I get a that doesn't work, I wonder why, which is much less harmful to my budget and my expectations. The other thing is that it's small enough, compact enough that it can actually ride along with your optical tube. If you have a really big optical tube, that's a tub. And then, yeah. Well, you need a really big mount for the optical tubs. Anyway, we'll talk about that in another presentation. I'm moving right along. So it really helps with the cable management piece, and the cable management piece, essentially is there. And then the other thing I'll talk a bit in a bit more length is it's got some kind of cool features for observing as well. So that's how that fits in. In terms of the options that are available, there's more than one of these things on the market, and I did a little research on 3. So the one I have is the Pocket Powerbox here. So what it's got is 4 12-volt outputs. So if I put one 12-volt input into the box, I get 4 coming out. So essentially you can think of it as a 4-for-1 kind of output. It's designed to handle 10 amps, which to me is seems like a lot of amps for a little box. But apparently modern electronics these days can handle that pretty well. It also has an extra dedicated DSLR output jack as well. So that's 5 outputs, but one of them is 8 volts. And that 8-volt output is designed with an adapter to plug directly into your DSLR camera. So if you're doing DSLR imaging, you can have a dedicated power supply to your camera coming out of the Powerbox as well. It's got 2 dew heater jacks on it, and it's got humidity, temperature, and power monitoring built in. ASCOM-based control software. Doesn't have a USB hub, focuser control, or a variable output. Those are all things that you need to pay more money for. So that's the one I have. There's an ultimate Powerbox on the market now, which has essentially 4 outputs plus one, what they call an always-on output. So an always-on output is constantly flowing power through, and it's the kind of thing that you would power your emergency, what happens if the power goes down and it comes back up piece of equipment. Twice the number of amperages. It has a variable output one that can be set in software to go from 3 to 12 volts depending on what your requirements are. So if you have an obscure piece of equipment or an odd piece of equipment that needs 9 volts or 6 volts or 8.5 volts or whatever, you can do that, including the DSLR one. It has focuser control built in, ASCOM control, humidity, temperature, and power. Quite a bit more expensive, about 3 times as much money. Then Kendrick Astro Instruments here in Toronto offers what they call the imaging power panel. It has 4 12-volt outputs, more amperage. It has an option to convert one of these into a DSLR output if you want, but it doesn't have some of these other fancy features that we'll be looking at. And the USB pub, I'm getting ahead of myself here again, is available, and included with that it has 7 ports. It says USB 3.0 as well, and that's sort of a little bit less money, but it's quite a bit more bulky. Like it's a box. So if you compare this one, which is about the size of a cigarette package, the Kendrick one is a little bit more like a half a shoebox. So they're both portable. They both can be attached to one's rig, but they're definitely a little bit. The Kendrick one is larger. So I chose none of the above because I wanted to have the ability to work with a USB hub as well. So what I did was I got myself a 12-volt DC USB hub, which is available on the market for about $60, which has a USB 3.0 hub. And you can see here it takes a 12-volt thing. So essentially I've run a wire from here to here, and I've got my powered hub for my equipment, and then I run another USB thing from here to there, and then this is now connected to my scope. So that's essentially what I've done. My setup is an imaging rig for light duty imaging. So I have my main telescope main imaging rig up at the CAO, but this one is the one I keep at home, and I want to be able to do grab and go kind of observing when I'm in a bit of a hurry. And essentially this is kind of on wheels here, and I can wheel it out into my backyard, and I plug it into the power, and I plug in this one blue USB cable here that I'm showing, and I can get everything going, including the joystick and so on. So this is where we're going to do the live demo, and we're going to do that. All right, drum roll please. Thank you. All right. So we're going to launch my favorite imaging software.
Deep Sky Clock event closing.
Whoops. It talks. That's all right. I'm going to go to gear. I'm going to connect scope.
Telescope connected.
I'm up and running. That never happens. Wow. So essentially I've got my telescope up and running here. I can take this. I can do a little moving around here with my telescope, and I can park it back where I want to go and so on. So that whole rig there is set up. The wires are a little messier than I might like, but again, one cable here, plug it in. The power box is running the USB hub. The USB hub is connected to the computer, and I have control over everything on the rig, and if I was launching my camera, I could connect that as well. So I'm able to actually do everything here with a single setup, and the nice thing is portability and all the wires and everything. I just threw this in the car, rolled it down here, plugged it in, turned it on, and got lucky. I mean, had it work as I usually expect it. So that's my rig, and that's how it's meant to work. Whoops, I'm just going to skip ahead here. Where's the navigate to slide? There we go. Thank you. So that's my setup. So, so the joystick is here, and I'm using EQ mod software, so I'm able to drive my mount here and everything. So that's the use case that we're talking about. Now, one of the other things I kind of like about this software is, or this tool is the software. Now I'm showing here the software here, and I hope everyone can see that. Can everyone see that well enough on the screen there? Big enough? So I'm connecting to the power to the Powerbox right now. So I've connected to it. It was flowing power through before, so obviously all my gear and everything was working, which is great. But now I've actually got it on the screen here, and I've got control over it. So one of the things here, this is the main control screen that you have. It has this thing called Ghost Mode window, which I think is kind of cool. So you kind of make it go away. It has a black theme to it, so it doesn't take away from your night vision too much. But it's basically showing me what's going on here. So it's got a built-in temperature and relative humidity sensor. It's telling me that the dew point here is 18 degrees Celsius. So if we turn on the air conditioning, we could get dew in this room if we're not careful. We've got dew heaters set with their settings here. I can turn them off with software. I can set them, this is auto dew here, so I can essentially turn on an automatic dew control here and turn them on full if I want. So I've actually got software control here. The DSLR output I mentioned is a separate channel just for the DSLR camera. I can turn that off if I want. And then this, what they call quad output, is the actual 4 output points that are there. We get cool graphs of the environmental changes. So I can see how the relative humidity is going. Not much change in the past minute, but if we give it some more time, maybe it'll change. But what I've seen happen when I've been using this is that you'll see what you're looking for is the dew point and the temperature to stay apart. Right, they are now. And when you see the temperature start to get closer and closer to the dew point, then that's a hint to you that you might need to do something about that. And the relative humidity here is another measure. But I mean, this is an example of sort of showing you what you can do with things. The other thing is the power graph here. So it's showing the input voltage, and then it's showing the output current that's going out to the devices that are connected. Both of these things are basically in a state of flat right now because I'm not doing anything with the mount, and I'm not actually running this off of a battery. If I was running this off of a battery, I would be seeing that my voltage would be potentially dropping here towards a case where it might be more of a problem. But in this case, again, I'm running it off the wall here, so the voltage is pretty steady because I've got a regulated power supply. There's a number of settings here, so I can change my communication port. I can see that it's chattering back and forth with my computer. There's an LED indicator there. I don't know if any of you can see it, but there's a little red light to say that it's working. I can turn that little red light off. And did it work? I think it did. Let's assume that it did for the sake of argument. And I can switch my metric and my units, and I can reboot the whole thing. And then how it comes on. So you see here it has sort of limited options in terms of how it boots up, if you will. All outputs on, just the 4 outlets, DSLR output on, or all outputs off. So that's my choices here. So the software is good. I mean, there's some limitations, but the limitations there are also based on the limits of the box itself. All right, so I'm just going to say that's what I would like, and I'll set that. And it stores it. It has its own little built-in static memory, so it works with that. So overall, I'm really quite impressed with the software that comes with this box. So it's a $200 and something unit, which does some useful things in the field, and the software that comes with it is kind of well thought out, and it seems to do what it can within limits, a pretty good job. So just in terms of what it looks like, because not all of you can see it, I mean, you're welcome to come up after the meeting and have a closer look, but essentially it's got 2 ends to it. The outputs, or the 12-volt outputs, come out here. The main input comes in on this side. Then you've got your DSLR output over here, the dew heater points, the USB port, and then the sensor for the temperature and humidity comes out on this side. So those things are essentially lined up in there, and then presumably somewhere inside that box is the circuit board that makes all of that magic happen. We looked at the actual things here live, so I won't necessarily review those again because we've already sort of talked about that. But there you can see when you're actually doing some slews and things like that, how you actually get some information feedback on how the power is essentially being used by your items there. And you can see, you know, the relative humidity and so forth, temperature and so forth is shown all the time. One of the things that is mentioned is that this is ASCOM aware, so it actually comes with a driver for ASCOM, so it actually will feed its temperature and humidity sensors settings into the ASCOM observing conditions module, which then allows it to be shared with telescopes and other components in your imaging setup. So it talks, it plays nice with other things, it seems. So so I'll start by sort of saying here that the things I found that were a little annoying about this box, generally I think it's been very good. Well, one thing is that it comes with a set of 4 output cables, and they don't fit with all 12-volt things that you might want to plug them into. So there seems to be like a custom 2.1 millimeter DC jack, and it doesn't quite work if you have a fatter jack, and that can be a real headache. What I've been able to do is to source. There are adapters available on the internet where you can get a little plug that sort of resizes your DC jack from one standard to another. But trial and error, I had to go and do a lot of hunting to get one that worked for a particular piece of equipment I wanted to do. Once it's working, it's a mechanical adapter, so it hasn't been a problem since, but that was a bit of an annoying thing. And there doesn't seem to be anything helpful on the website. It's like they're assuming that everybody's going to use their standard, you know, and I'm not quite sure where that's coming from, but that is the way that's set up. The other thing was, the good news is that you can't burn it out by plugging 20 volts into it and having it go kaput. It just won't work, and it'll safely cut itself off immediately. The problem with that, though, is that it doesn't really tell you why it's not working. So I was here for a public outreach event in, I think, April for Astronomy Day, and I was all set to show off my gear, and it didn't work. And I couldn't figure out why until I took my wall wart power supply home and found it was running at 14.5 volts. So the power cutoff basically goes up to 13.2, and if it goes beyond that, it's like, nope, not interested in that power, thank you very much. And and it doesn't tell you why. Like, there's nothing in the software that says, whoop, I'm having an overpower situation here, so you can't deal with it. And then the other little thing I noticed was that it doesn't really, unlike some other versions of this, it doesn't come with brackets per se. So you have to think Velcro, and I'm using some zip ties here to get it on the telescope. So I'd like a nicer, cleaner attachment, but that's pretty small potatoes. So one thing so in terms of the positives, I really like the fact that it allows me to do all of my wiring in the daylight before I even think about going out and doing any observing. It pre-stages all of that stuff. You can make sure you've got the right wires in the right places with the right lengths and get it going. One thing that I like, especially about having a USB hub like this attached to the unit, is that it keeps your USB ports consistent. I can't tell you how many times I've had troubles where I plugged a USB device into a different port, and then all of a sudden it gets reassigned to a new port, and then all of a sudden all of my imaging stuff that thought it was on port 7, now it's on port 14, and it gets all confused, it gives up, and it goes home. So this rig here means that if I just plug this thing into a consistent port on my laptop every time, everything else is staying the same. It boots up faster, everything comes up nicely, and it starts to play nice. I really like the notion of the auto dew heater. I really like the notion that it's monitoring the difference between relative humidity and the dew point, so that if I'm in a case where I need running on battery and power's at a premium, I'm only using my dew heaters when I really need to. That's a really cool thing. And we talked about all of that. Very compact, very lightweight. It is designed to fit in your pocket, although it doesn't do very much good there. So, conclusion, I think it's a pretty useful piece of kit. I haven't had too much trouble with it. I really like the notion that I'm able to keep a closer eye on my power consumption and keep it sort of all in one place, and that's been really, really good for me. So while I was researching this, I came across, of course, the Ultimate Powerbox version 2. This is the next generation. This is the $600 version of this same thing that's offered by the same people. Mucho better than the one that I bought. But it's pretty interesting in the sense that it comes with all of these things, the dew heater ports and the power outputs, and it's got the things, but it's also got this new Ethernet port as well, which allows it to expand potentially to do all of these things. And the thing that struck me was about 10 years ago, I went down to NEAF with Phil Chow and a few other
Deep
members.
Sky Clock event.
Thank you. With a few other people down to NEAF, and one of the things that was intriguing to me there was the observatory control software suite guys who were had set up an observatory in the corner, and they had all of this bits and bobs designed to automate your observatory. It was only $5,000 for a starter kit, right? So what struck me about this was this is down to like $600. The fact you can turn these power points on and off with software in this version. I can turn up, I can turn on number 1, number 2, and number 3, but forget 4. The fact that I can run a computer off of this if I want to, I've got the ability to expand to it. This is an observatory control system. It's the heart of an observatory control system, and all you need to do is to add a few more bits and bobs to it, and you would have something that's pretty complete, and it seems to be designed for pretty robust use and pretty effective use in the field. So I think we're going to see probably a few more products like this. I've been impressed with it. I'm impressed with the software, and I'm certainly interested in if anyone would like to have a look at it afterwards. I would be happy to give you a more guided tour, and that's my presentation. Thank you. Any questions? Yeah. Well, we're going to get it on audio, Steve.
Is this on? So the way things are heading is that not only do you put this on top of your scope to use the wiring, but you put your computer on top of the scope as well. So
yeah.
That was my
that one there.
goal. Yeah, exactly. So I actually did a Raspberry Pi, and I built the thing myself, and it does all of these things in a project box about this big. So it's a little cheaper, but it's a lot more work. But these things are fantastic. Have you thought about putting your computer up there?
Well, that's what my main observing rig at the CAO has that. I have a mini PC with a USB hub, but I don't have a power controller. I just got like a few more wires going in and out. So I'm completely with you on the same page in terms of like the convenience and the utility of having all of that running with the scope. This one here is an interesting hybrid because it gives you kind of most of the features you might need in a smaller package. It's kind of like for your DSLR imaging rig, if you will. But this one is the one that's sort of more for the big users, especially the fact you can turn on and off specific components. So if once you've if you don't want to use certain things, you can just disable them if you want with software, which is nice. Yes, you can. 2 of them. 2 of them are. So the question was, can you also turn off USB ports? Yes, you can with software. So that's kind of cool. So you might want to have a look at that. How's it powered? 12 volts, 12 volt input up to 25 amps. So you need some sort of I have a Pyramid 5 amp box here for this particular rig. So you need something like that to give yourself nice clean power. They sell a power adapter as well, but that's a different thing. Any other questions? Yes, sir. The runner's almost there.
When you say in the field, you mean in the field with an extension cord available?
Well, you can run this off of a battery as well, right? Like
You could connect it to our car battery type
Yeah,
thing?
absolutely. So essentially, I'm just going to walk around here, but I've got one 12 volt cable here That one is just running everything, and that could have gone into a car battery, but a car battery was more heavy to carry here tonight than.
All right, gotcha.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Yes, sir, at the back.
I'm just curious what the weight of that box is, and also what power does it use itself for its functions?
I think it weighs about 8 ounces or 6 ounces, something like that. In terms of how much power it uses, I think it's got to be minimal. Like it's a small processor with a single board, and it's flowing. It's mostly about flowing the power through, and just I don't think it has any significant power consumption, but I don't know for sure. You'd have to check specs on that. All right, maybe one more. Yes, sir.
I have some questions for you. You said the connectors are a weird size. I was wondering about that. But I'm curious your impression of how robust those connectors are, because we get pulling and maybe snags and stuff like that on connectors. The power 12-volt output connectors, they look like they're just a plug that pushes in, so they could pull out, right? They're not a twist on.
They are push-in ones. They are. I find they're hard to push in, so I think they're a little bit more robust, and that kind of maybe comes to the standard sizing question. But yes, that is something. However, you have cables, and ultimately one could, tear off the ends on them and make custom cables yourself. But that's a do-it-yourself piece of activity that not everybody's up for. Yeah, another one. Okay. All right, so I noticed we had a couple of new people here for the first time. I've got a copy of the 2019 Observer's Calendar here. So I'm going to give this away to whichever one of you new people here for the first time would like a calendar with cool pictures of space on it. Which one would? Yes? All right, hand it up there. There we go. A good foam for that. It's a great calendar. I already have 2, so that's my 3rd one, so I want to give it to a good home. And thank you.